Jake had always believed that the galaxy was a vast and unforgiving place. After years of war and battle, he had learned not to trust easily, nor to hold on to the past. But sometimes the past refused to let go. It was late one evening when Jake first heard her voice again. He had been back on Earth for months, recovering from a mission that had left him with more scars than he cared to admit. Life on Earth was supposed to be quiet, peaceful, but it never seemed to last. He was walking through the colony's central plaza, his boots clacking on the ground, when a familiar sound stopped him in his tracks. It was a transmission, his old communicator buzzing to life in his pocket. He pulled the device out, and the voice that greeted him was one he had not heard in years. "Do you remember me?" The voice was soft but clear, filled with an emotion that made his heart skip. It was her. Amara. He froze, his mind racing. Amara was the alien princess he had once fought beside years ago on a distant planet. She had been a fearless leader, strong and determined. She had been a symbol of hope to her people and a symbol of something much more to him. But that had been before the accident, the one that had changed everything. After the attack on her kingdom, Amara had been severely injured. She had lost the ability to walk and, for a time, her confidence. She had sent Jake away, pushing him back into the chaos of war, telling him that she needed time to heal, both physically and emotionally. He had never heard from her again until now. "Amara," he whispered to himself. His fingers trembled as he hit the play button on the communicator. The message continued. "I know you've moved on. I know you have your own life now, but I need to see you. I can't do this alone anymore. Please, come back to me." Jake's heart pounded in his chest. He stood there in the cold, the familiar voices of the colony around him, nothing more than a distant hum. He couldn't shake the memories of the woman he had left behind. The strong, confident princess who had once led her people with an iron will. The woman who had smiled at him, who had shared everything with him, and who had made him believe in something bigger than the endless wars he fought. He never thought he would hear from her again. He never imagined she would want to see him after all these years, after everything that had happened. But the message was clear. She needed him. She wanted him back. Without a second thought, Jake decided he had to go to her, no matter the cost. The journey took longer than expected. The galaxy was a vast and dangerous place, and even with the best ships, it could take weeks to reach a distant planet. When Jake finally arrived, he couldn't help but notice how different everything felt. The planet, once full of life and color, now seemed quieter. The air was heavy with uncertainty. The people who greeted him were familiar. But there was a sadness in their eyes that wasn't there before. The palace where Amara lived stood tall in the distance, its stone walls weathered by time. Jake made his way toward it, his heart beating faster with each step. What had happened to her? What kind of life had she been living all these years? He tried not to think about the pain he had left behind, the promises he had made but failed to keep. He couldn't focus on that now. Needed to see her? He needed to understand who she had become. As he reached the gates, an old servant came to greet him. "You must be Jake," she said with a small smile. "The princess has been expecting you." Jake nodded, following the servant through the grand hallways. The palace was as beautiful as he remembered, though there were signs of wear cracks. In the marble floors, tapestries that looked slightly faded. It all spoke of a kingdom that had suffered, not just from external threats, but from internal pain as well. He couldn't help but wonder how much of that pain had been Amara's own. When they finally reached the royal chambers, Jake found himself standing in front of a large door. The servant knocked lightly before opening it, allowing Jake to step inside. And there she was, Amara. She was sitting by a large window, her back to him, gazing out at the stars. She looked almost the same, though time had clearly passed. Her once vibrant green skin now looked pale under the soft light, and her hair, once flowing and wild, was neatly braided down her back. But the most striking change was in her posture. She was sitting in a large chair, her legs folded beneath her. She wasn't standing. She wasn't moving like she used to. Jake's heart sank. "Amara," he whispered her name. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. There was a soft sadness in her gaze, but something else, to something warmer, something familiar. She smiled faintly, and for a moment, Jake saw the princess he remembered. The strong woman who had stood by his side, who had faced the impossible and never backed down. "Jake," she said softly, her voice full of emotion. "You came." He walked toward her, his footsteps slow. He didn't know what to say, how to bridge the gap between who she had been and who she was now. But as he stood before her, he realized there was no need for words. He didn't have to explain. She didn't have to apologize. They had always understood each other without speaking. Jake knelt down in front of her, his eyes never leaving hers. "I never forgot you," he said quietly. "I never will." Mara's smile grew, and she reached out to touch his hand. "I didn't think you would," she whispered. "But I've missed you, Jake. More than you can know." For a moment, time seemed to stop. The years apart didn't matter. The changes didn't matter. In that moment, they were the same. They were two souls who had shared something powerful, something unbreakable. And now, after all this time, they had found their way back to each other. But Jake couldn't shake the feeling that things had changed. The woman in front of him wasn't the same princess who had fought by his side in the past. And as much as he wanted to pretend that nothing had changed, the reality was staring him in the face. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a woman who had suffered. A woman who had fought her own battles in ways Jake could never truly understand, and now it was his turn to fight by her side again. But this time, it wouldn't be about wars and battles. This time, it would be about healing, about helping her find the strength she had lost and rediscovering the woman she had once been. Jake spent the next few days in the palace, trying to understand Amara's new life. Everything had changed since the last time they were together. The princess, once full of energy and purpose, was now more subdued, and Jake could see how much her injury had affected her. She had always been a warrior, a leader. But now, she was forced to sit while her people looked to her for guidance. Jake could feel the weight of her responsibilities, and it was clear she was struggling to carry them alone. In the mornings, Jake would help her with tasks she couldn't do alone, simple things, like adjusting the pillows on her chair or helping her move from one room to another. It was strange for him, remembering how she had been so independent before. Amara had never asked for help, never needed it. But now she had no choice. The chair she sat in was custom-made, designed to help her move and support her body. Still, it wasn't the same. Jake couldn't understand it fully. He didn't know what it was like to lose the use of his legs, to feel trapped in his own body. He could only watch and be there for her, offering a hand whenever she needed it. Amara, on the other hand, never complained. She spoke little of her pain, both physical and emotional. Instead, she spent most of her time working on plans for her kingdom, discussing ways to strengthen their defenses, or trying to find peaceful solutions with neighboring species. She still held the title of princess, but her role had changed. She was no longer the face of the battlefield. She was the mind behind it. One evening, after a long day of discussions with her advisors, Amara sat alone in her chambers. Jake had left the room to allow her some space. He knew how important it was for her to have quiet time to think. But he couldn't shake the feeling that she was pushing herself too hard. He stood outside her door for a moment, unsure if he should enter. But before he could decide, the door opened, and there she was, looking more fragile than he had ever seen her. "Jake," she said quietly, her voice soft but carrying a trace of strength. "I need to speak with you." He stepped inside, his heart racing. He had missed her presence, her warmth. She had always been so full of life, even when things seemed impossible. But now, there was a distance between them, a space Jake didn't know how to close. He followed her to the window where she gazed out at the stars, the vastness of the universe reflecting in her eyes. "I've been thinking a lot," Mara began, her voice distant, as if she were trying to figure out what to say. "About everything. About us. About what I've become." Jake stayed quiet, letting her speak. He wasn't sure what to say either. He had been waiting for her to open up, but he had never expected her to talk like this. She seemed so lost, so unsure of herself, You've always seen me as strong, she continued, her voice trembling slightly. You saw me as a warrior, a leader. But now, I don't know who I am anymore. I'm not the woman I used to be. Jake's heart ached as he listened to her. He could feel the weight of her words, the burden she was carrying. He wanted to say something to comfort her, but he wasn't sure what would help. How could he? Make her see that she was still the person he had admired. Still the woman who had fought beside him on that distant planet. The one who had made him believe in something greater than himself. You're still the woman I remember, Jake finally said, his voice steady but full of emotion. You may not be the same, but you're still strong. You don't need to prove anything to anyone, least of all to me. Amara turned to him, her eyes softening. But I do need to prove something, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Not to others, but to myself. I've been stuck in this palace, Jake. I've been hiding from who I used to be, afraid of what I've become. But I can't keep pretending that I'm okay. I need to face it. Jake stepped closer to her, his presence comforting. You don't have to do it alone, Amara, he said. I'm here. I'll help you. She smiled faintly, but it was a smile of gratitude, not of happiness. I know you will. You always have. For the next few days, they spent their time together in silence, working on the kingdom's affairs. But there was a shift in the air. Amara seemed lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Jake couldn't help but notice the small changes, the way she smiled a little more. The way her eyes sparkled when she talked about her people. One afternoon, as they walked through the gardens of the palace, Amara stopped to admire the flowers. Jake watched her for a moment, seeing how peaceful she looked, surrounded by nature. It was hard to believe that this was the same woman who had once led armies and fought in the heat of battle. Do you ever think about what would have happened if things had been different? She asked suddenly, breaking the silence. The accident hadn't happened? If I had stayed the same? Jake thought for a moment. He had always wondered the same thing, but now, standing next to her, he realized that he wouldn't change a thing. She was still the woman he cared for, still the one who had earned his respect and admiration. I don't know, he said, his voice honest, but I do know that you're still strong. You're still the woman I fell for. The accident didn't change that. Mara looked at him, a mixture of sadness and hope in her eyes. I've been afraid to let go of the past, to move forward. But maybe I don't have to let it go completely. Maybe I just need to accept that I'm different now. Jake smiled, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. And that's okay. You don't have to be the same as before. You're still you, Amara, and that's enough for me. Amara looked up at the stars, her heart feeling a little lighter. She had spent so long running from her new reality, but now with Jake by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. She wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. The days that followed were filled with a quiet sort of peace. Mara and Jake settled into a routine, each finding small ways to help the other. Jake would help her with tasks she couldn't do alone, and Amara would offer him the wisdom she had gained as a ruler. The days passed, and Jake saw more and more of the princess he had once known, though the journey was not without its challenges. Amara had always been a strong leader, but now her kingdom was struggling, and she felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders more than ever before. She had been forced to rely on others in ways she never had before. And though her people respected her, Amara knew they still saw her as fragile. She could see it in their eyes. They were worried. One afternoon, Jake accompanied Amara to the royal council chamber. It was a large room with walls covered in tapestries, each one telling a story of the kingdom's past victories and struggles. Amara's advisors sat at the long table, and when they saw Jake enter the room with her, they all stood to greet him. Jake, one of the advisors said, nodding politely, "It's good to see you again." Jake returned the greeting with a small nod, but he could sense the tension in the room. He had been away from the political affairs of the kingdom for too long to know exactly what was going on. But it didn't take a genius to figure out that something was wrong. Amara sat at the head of the table, her eyes scanning the room. She had always been calm and composed in situations like this, but today there was a visible struggle within her. She shifted in her seat, her hand resting lightly on the arm of her chair. Is everything all right? Jake asked, his voice low as he approached her. He didn't want to disturb the meeting, but he could see the anxiety building inside her. Amara turned her head to him and smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. It will be, she said softly, though Jake could tell she wasn't convinced. Advisors continued discussing the state of the kingdom, but Amara seemed distant. Her thoughts were elsewhere. Jake could see it. She was lost in her own world, trying to solve problems that felt too big for her alone. After the meeting, Mara dismissed her advisors, and the room emptied quickly, leaving the two of them alone. Jake. I don't know how much longer I can keep up with this, Amara admitted, her voice quiet but full of emotion. I feel like I'm failing my people. Every decision I make seems to lead to more problems. I've tried to be strong, but I don't know if I can do this anymore. Jake moved closer, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. Not failing, Amara, he said softly. You've done more for your people than anyone could have asked. You're not alone in this. You don't have to carry the weight of the kingdom by yourself. Amara shook her head slowly. But I have to, Jake. I'm the princess. It's my job to lead. My people rely on me. If I can't stand tall for them, who will? Jake understood her frustration. She had always been the one to carry the responsibility. The one who had always been the rock for everyone around her. But now, she was no longer just the warrior princess who led armies into battle. Now, she was someone who needed help, someone who had to rely on others. And that was the hardest thing for her to accept. You don't have to stand tall alone, Jake said, his voice firm. I'm here. Your people are here. You've built a kingdom with strong people, and they will follow you no matter what. But you have to trust them. Mara sighed deeply, her eyes looking out the window at the kingdom below. She had always been strong, but now she felt weak. She felt as though her disability had stripped away her identity, leaving her uncertain of her place in the world. She wasn't sure how to lead from this new perspective, how to rebuild the kingdom she had lost. I know I need to trust them, Amara said slowly, her voice tinged with regret. But it's hard. Every day I feel like I'm slipping further away from the person I was. I've spent so much time hiding from this new life that I don't know how to face it anymore. Jake sat down beside her, his gaze gentle. It's okay to feel like this? It's okay to feel lost. You're not the same person you were before, but that doesn't mean you're any less capable of leading. You've got wisdom, strength, and the heart of a ruler.
Oh.
You just have to find your new path. Amara's eyes met his, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself feel something other than doubt. She smiled, a small, fragile smile, but it was a start. Thank you, Jake, she whispered, for reminding me of who I am. The rest of the day passed quietly. Amara spent time with her advisors, and Jake watched from a distance, his heart swelling with pride. He had always admired her, even when she had been a stranger to him, but now he saw a new side of her. She wasn't the invincible warrior she had once been, but she was still a force to be reckoned with. The following weeks saw more of the same quiet moments, meaningful conversations, and steady progress. Jake continued to support Amara in every way he could. He helped her with her physical therapy, encouraging her as she relearned how to move her body with the aid of special tools. The work was slow, but with Jake's help, Amara began to regain some of her independence. But it wasn't just the physical side of things that needed healing. Amara's mind was still troubled, still burdened by the loss of her former strength and the pressure of ruling her people. Jake saw the toll it took on her, but he also saw the flicker of hope in her eyes. She was learning to accept who she was now, to embrace the person she had become, and that gave Jake hope for the future. He knew that the road ahead would not be easy. But with Amara's strength, his support, and the loyalty of her people, he believed they could rebuild. Together, they could face whatever challenges came next, and he would be by her side, no matter what. The days passed quickly, and with each new sunrise, Mara felt herself growing stronger, not just physically but emotionally as well. Her time spent with Jake had opened her eyes to the possibilities of her new life. She was no longer the woman she had once been, but she was discovering something new within herself, something she hadn't expected. Jake's presence had become a steady anchor. He was always there, ready to help her, to listen when she needed to talk, and to support her when her doubts grew too loud. Slowly, Amara began to accept that she didn't have to do everything alone. She wasn't the only one who carried the weight of her kingdom. Her people, her advisors, and now Jake, all shared in the responsibility. One morning, Amara stood by the large windows of her palace, looking out over the kingdom she had vowed to protect. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden light over the land. It was a beautiful sight, but it also reminded her of all the things she still needed to do. "Are you going to stand there all day, or should we get to work?" Voice broke through her thoughts, and Amara turned to see him standing in the doorway. His arms crossed with a playful smirk on his face. She smiled, her first real smile of the day. "I was thinking," she said, her voice soft, "about everything we've accomplished. It feels like we're moving forward, but there's so much more to do." Jake walked toward her, his footsteps steady. He could tell that Amara was feeling the weight of the future pressing down on her. But he also knew how far she had come. She was no longer the princess who had felt lost in her own palace, unsure of how to face the world. She was becoming the leader her kingdom needed. "You've done more than enough," Jake said, standing beside her. "But you're right. There's always more to do. The question is, how do we move forward?" Amara thought for a moment, her gaze returning to the horizon. "We need to unite our people," she said finally. "The kingdom has been divided for so long. We've been fighting among ourselves, and that needs to change. If we're going to stand against the other factions, we need to work together. I don't have all the answers, but I know that I can't do it alone." Jake nodded. "You don't have to. We'll figure it out together." For the first time in a long while, Amara felt a spark of hope. She had been so focused on her limitations, on what she could no longer do, that she had forgotten what she still had. She still had her mind, her experience, and now she had Jake. Together, they could rebuild. Not just the kingdom, but the trust and unity that had been lost. The next few weeks were filled with meetings, discussions, and planning. Mara called upon her advisors to help her put together a strategy to unite the kingdom. Jake was by her side every step of the way, offering his insights, his support, and his unwavering belief in her. The more time they spent working together, the more Amara realized how much she had changed. She had always been a fighter, but now she was learning to lead in a different way. She didn't have to rely on her strength to command respect. She was learning that true leadership came from understanding others, from listening, and from making decisions that were best for everyone, not just herself. One evening, as the sun began to set, Amara sat in her study, poring over maps and reports. Jake was nearby, going through some documents as well. The palace was quiet. The only sound, the occasional rustle of paper and the distant hum of the city below. "You know," Jake said, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking. You've come a long way since I got here." Amara looked up, her expression softening. "I'm not where I want to be yet," she said, her voice quiet. "There's still so much I need to do. I have to fix what's broken." "You've already started fixing it," Jake replied. "You're not doing it alone. I'm here, and so are your people." Amara smiled, her heart feeling lighter than it had in a long time. "I guess I'm starting to believe that," she admitted. "I don't have to carry all the weight. I just need to guide us all in the right direction." Jake stood up and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And I'll help you do that." "You're not alone anymore, Mara." "Oh?" She nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to face it. She had come so far, and with Jake by her side, she knew she could face anything. The challenges ahead were great, but she was no longer afraid of them. The next morning, Amara held a council meeting with the leaders of the different factions within her kingdom. The atmosphere was tense, the room filled with people who had long been at odds with each other. But Amara remained calm, her voice steady as she addressed the group. "I know that we have faced difficult times," she began, her gaze sweeping over the room, "but we can no longer afford to be divided. The galaxy is changing, and we must change with it. Our strength lies in unity, and we must work together to ensure the survival of our people." The room was silent for a moment as the leaders exchanged wary glances. But Amara stood firm, her posture strong and confident. She wasn't the warrior princess she once was, but she was still a leader who could inspire others to follow. Jake stood at her side, watching as she spoke with authority. He had seen her grow from a woman who had felt trapped by her circumstances to one who had found a new strength. She wasn't the same as she had been, but she was even more powerful now, one by one. The leaders began to speak, offering their support and ideas for rebuilding the kingdom. The conversation was no longer filled with distrust and division. Slowly they began to work together, laying the groundwork for a new future. By the end of the day, Amara felt a sense of accomplishment. She had done it. She had united her people. And with their support, she knew that they could rebuild. Not just their kingdom, but their faith in each other, as Amara stood in the quiet of the palace that evening. Looking out over the kingdom, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The future was uncertain, but she was no longer afraid. With Jake by her side and her people behind her, she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The kingdom was finally beginning to heal, but there were still obstacles ahead. Amara could feel the weight of her responsibility more than ever. The people had begun to trust her again, but the road to rebuilding the kingdom would not be easy. There were still enemies in the galaxy who saw her weakness and would do anything to take advantage of it. Amara spent her days strategizing, working with her advisors, and making decisions that would guide her people through the challenges ahead. But it wasn't just the kingdom's enemies that worried her. Deep inside, she felt the constant pull of doubt. Could she really do this? Could she truly lead her people and protect them from the dangers they faced? Jake had been with her every step of the way. He never asked for anything in return, just offering his help and support when she needed it most. His presence had become a constant comfort, and she found herself relying on him more than she ever thought possible. He was not just a warrior. He was her partner, her confidant, and her friend. One evening, after a long day of meetings and plans, Amara sat alone in her study, her mind racing. The weight of her responsibilities seemed to press down on her more than ever. The challenges ahead were daunting, and she couldn't shake the fear that she might not be enough. She had always been strong, but now she felt vulnerable. She wasn't the same woman she had been, and that scared her. As she stared out the window, lost in thought, she heard a soft knock at the door. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Jake had a way of knowing when she needed him. "Come in," she called softly. The door opened, and Jake stepped inside. He didn't speak immediately, but instead walked over to her desk, placing a hand on the back of her chair. "You look like you've got the weight of the galaxy on your shoulders," Jake said gently, his voice filled with concern. Amara sighed. Leaning back in her chair, "I do," she admitted. "I don't know if I can handle everything that's coming. I feel like I'm losing myself in all of this. I don't know if I'm the right person for the job anymore." Jake crouched down in front of her so that they were eye level. "Amara," he said, his voice soft but firm, "you've been through so much already. I've seen how much you've grown, how much strength you've found in yourself. You're stronger than you think. You don't have to do this alone. I'm here, and your people are here too. You're not alone in this." Amara looked into his eyes, searching for the comfort she knew he could offer. She had always trusted Jake, but now, more than ever, did she realize just how much she depended on him. "I know," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But what if I fail? What if I can't protect everyone? I'm not the same person I was before. My body doesn't work the way it used to. I can't do what I once did, and it feels like I'm not enough." Jake reached out, gently lifting her chin so that their gazes met. "You don't need to be the person you were before. You're exactly who your people need right now. You've been through things that most people could never understand. You're more than enough, Amara." The sincerity in his voice struck a chord deep within her. She had been so focused on what she couldn't do that she had forgotten all the things she had already achieved. She had fought through unimaginable pain, rebuilt her kingdom, and earned the respect of her people once again. "I don't know how to keep going," Amara admitted, her voice shaky. "Every day feels like a struggle." Jake smiled gently, squeezing her hand. "One step at a time," he said. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. You don't have to do everything perfectly. But as long as you keep moving forward, that's enough." Amara's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. She felt so tired, so unsure of herself. But Jake's words gave her the strength to keep going. She wasn't alone. She had people who cared about her, people who believed in her, and she had Jake, her partner, her protector, her friend. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Jake's smile softened. "You don't have to do this without me. I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together." That night, Amara slept better than she had in weeks. She still felt the weight of her responsibilities, but the fear that had clouded her mind began to fade. With Jake by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. The following days were filled with more challenges. News of other factions in the galaxy began to reach her, some offering support, while others sought to exploit her kingdom's vulnerability. Amara had to make difficult decisions, but she no longer faced them alone. With Jake's help, she navigated the complexities of politics and warfare. Keeping her people safe while forging alliances with those who could be trusted, Jake became her most trusted advisor, not just because of his experience as a soldier, but because of his understanding of her struggle. He saw her as more than a princess or a warrior. He saw her as a person, with flaws and doubts, but also with incredible strength and resilience. One evening, as they worked together in her study, Jake looked at her with a serious expression. "We've made a lot of progress," he said. "We need to start thinking ahead. The enemy factions won't stop. And there's still a lot of work to do to secure your kingdom's future." Amara nodded, her mind already working through the next steps. "You're right," she said, her voice steady. "We need to make sure we're ready. It's not just for the battles ahead, but for what happens after." Moving to the window and looking out over the kingdom, "We will be ready. You're not alone in this, Amara. I'm with you every step of the way." Amara looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. She wasn't the woman she once was, but she was learning to embrace who she had become. With Jake by her side, she had learned that strength didn't always come from what you could do. Sometimes, it came from who you had by your side, and the trust you placed in others. The journey ahead was uncertain. But one thing was clear: Mara was no longer afraid of what the future held. Together with Jake and her people, she would face whatever came next, and she would lead them into a new era of hope and unity. The day had finally come. The long-awaited summit of the galaxy's leaders was upon them, and Amara was ready. At least she told herself she was. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, meeting with advisors, strengthening alliances, and planning strategies for the future of her kingdom. The pressure of representing her people weighed on her shoulders, but she had come so far, and she wasn't about to back down now. Jake stood by her side as they entered the grand hall where the summit was being held. The room was filled with representatives from different planets, each seated at long tables, their faces a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Amara had always known that not everyone trusted her, especially after the accident that had left her unable to lead in the way. She once had, but today was different. Today, she wasn't going to let anyone see her as weak. Jake gave her a reassuring smile, his presence a steady source of comfort. "You've got this, Amara," he whispered. Amara nodded, taking a deep breath. "We'll see." She made her way to the front of the room where the leader of the summit awaited her. The tall alien, with scales of deep blue and piercing yellow eyes, extended his hand in greeting. "Princess Amara," he said with a nod. "It is an honor to finally meet you in person." "The honor is mine," Amara replied, her voice steady. She shook his hand, feeling the weight of the moment settling in. This was not just a meeting. This was a chance to prove herself, not just as a ruler, but as a leader who could unite the galaxy's people. The summit began. And Amara listened carefully as each representative made their case. Talks of trade agreements, military alliances, and planetary resources filled the room. But all Amara could think about was how she could use this summit to strengthen her kingdom's position and secure its future. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the people who had trusted her, who had supported her through everything. As the discussions continued, Mara began to speak, her voice calm but strong. My people have faced many challenges, she said, addressing the room. We've been through wars, disasters, and the loss of leadership, but we are still here. And I am here to ensure that we remain a part of this galaxy, a part of this future. We cannot stand alone, but together we can make a stronger galaxy for all of us. Her words were met with murmurs of agreement from some of the leaders, while others remained silent, their faces unreadable. Amara didn't let their silence discourage her. She had learned that silence often spoke louder than words. As the discussion continued, she kept her focus sharp, her eyes scanning the room, reading each person's reaction. Jake remained by her side throughout the day, offering his silent support. Knew this was a pivotal moment for Amara, and he could see how much it meant to her. She had worked so hard to get here, to prove that her disability didn't define her. He was proud of how far she had come, but he also knew that the hardest part was yet to come. Later in the afternoon, the summit reached its most crucial point. The final topic on the agenda was a potential alliance between Amara's kingdom and several of the other factions. It was a deal that would provide her people with the resources they desperately needed, but it would also require her to make some tough compromises. Amara took a deep breath as the representatives of the other factions began to speak. Some were willing to support her, while others had conditions that made the agreement less favorable. The room was tense, with each leader weighing the pros and cons of the deal. Amara stood, ready to speak again. She felt the eyes of everyone in the room on her, the weight of the moment heavy on her shoulders. I understand the concerns many of you have, she began, her voice steady but firm. But let me be clear, I will not sacrifice my people for the sake of easy agreements. We are willing to work with all of you, but we will not be forced into compromises that endanger our future. My kingdom has been through enough, and we will not make deals that undermine our strength. Her words rang out in the silent room, and for a moment no one spoke. It was as if the entire galaxy had stopped to listen. Jay could see the determination in her eyes, the fire that had always burned in her heart. She wasn't the same woman she had been when she first lost her ability to walk. She was stronger now, not just because of what she had been through, but because she had found a way to lead without giving up her integrity. One by one, the leaders began to speak, some agreeing with her, some pushing back. But in the end, Amara's words had carried the room. She had stood her ground. Her kingdom would benefit from it. As the summit concluded and the delegates began to leave, Jake looked at Amara with pride. You did it, he said, his voice full of admiration. Amara smiled, exhaustion finally beginning to settle in her bones. We did it, she corrected him. We did it together. Jake placed a hand on her shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. You're the one who did the hard work. You've come a long way, Amara. I'm proud of you. Amara's smile grew, though it was tinged with a quiet sadness. I couldn't have done it without you, Jake. You've always been there for me, and I don't think I could have found my way without you. Jake shook his head, a soft laugh escaping him. I didn't do anything you couldn't have done on your own. I just reminded you of who you are. Amara looked out the window, her gaze thoughtful. I've come a long way, she said quietly, but I still have so much to learn. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. Jake nodded in agreement. Knowing that Amara had more to give, he had watched her grow from a princess who had lost everything into a leader who would shape the future of her people. And he would be there every step of the way, helping her, supporting her, and standing by her side as she led them into a new era. For Amara, the summit was a victory, but it was only one step on the long road ahead. There would be more challenges, more obstacles, but with Jake by her side and the strength she had found within herself, she knew she was ready for whatever came next. Together, they would face the galaxy and create a future where her people could thrive.